so many consultations with regards to the budget, but I would say if there was a word that popped out, it was inclusive.
Inclusive.
I think that the budget seemed to reflect a desire on the hand of government to include as many people as possible in the development of the country by extending a hand to many different areas. So I think that stood out.
It's interesting you said that, Kenny, because about 20 minutes after the Prime Minister concluded his address, I got a call from a very close friend of mine, excitedly telling me that, but Eddie, there's something there for everybody. Everybody has been included. And so you are merely confirming what he shared with me. But those of us who may have listened, I was anticipating a budget of that nature because I listened carefully. I don't know if you recall the address to the nation the Prime Minister delivered on the 17th of May as the response to the COVID pandemic, our response. And among the statements he made, that statement stood out to me that the interest of our people must be at the center of every measure we take. That was a telling statement to me in that address. The interests of our people must be at the center of every measure we take. And I think, the budget indeed spoke to the interests of every category of person in this country. Okay, so Mark, let's look at for a minute or two on the general economic environment in which this budget address was delivered. Let me start with Kenny on that. Kenny, what's you're in the private sector, perhaps those in the private sector are feeling the pinch from COVID and the post-disasters going back to Erica the most,
Yeah, you're right. Our economy is a consumption-based economy. And when the economy is ticking over, the government has structured the economy in such a way that VAT, for example, is our major tax revenue for the economy. And so therefore, when consumption drops, their revenue drops. In terms of our members, and I can say there's a slight difference between our members and the general private sector. It's slight. We have a lot of supermarkets and larger companies, the utilities, etc., the telecoms companies. And obviously, the lowering of the level of jobs in the economy means that there are less people able to buy services and goods, and that has an effect on our members and in general on the economy. In certain areas, just like post-Maria, there'll be a spike after a drop in revenue. So, generally Dominicans tend to punch over their weight in terms of consumption of food, for example. So after an event like COVID, where people were, when I say after an event, the initial lockdown event, when people came out, they started to consume again, in droves. But still, that consumption level is from a lesser base. So I would say the economic picture right now is reduced, but there's also been a tendency for, out of these events, just like in every other country, for the major players to consolidate their power and to grow, because they can actually buy extra services, they can actually buy extra locations, they can add on new technology. You've noticed, for example, a lot more people are doing things like delivery and takeaway services. Some of the supermarkets have extended their functionality, but at the base has narrowed. So it was interesting to hear the Prime Minister talk about widening the economy. And that is something that we've always championed, because the danger of creating a pyramid in our economy where you have a wide base, but not a wide base of people who are going up in a rectangle, but staying basically subsisting as businesses, that's a danger. And so therefore the budget had to deal with that.
So Mark, your views on the general environment?
Well, the general environment is this here. An economy like Dominica's lives by exporting, whether it's services or goods. For the last how many years, we have been basically been earning our keep by exporting services, mostly through tourism. And as is well known, the tourism industry is the one that has been hit the hardest all over the world. And so our job essentially is to try to get the tourism industry back functioning as quickly as we can, while not endangering the health of the local population. Because for now, as far as we know, we have gotten rid of the virus on island, but it can come back to Dominica by somebody abroad bringing it in to us there. So there's that tightrope we need to walk there in terms of opening the economy back and inviting guests to come back to us there. And I was looking at the figures of the revenue, and I noticed there's a figure they call non-tax revenue, which seems to have taken a drop, and the estimate expected to sort of rise a bit there in like 3 years' time. So that's our inability to earn sufficient foreign exchange will impact on the things that we can actually do and carry out. Because as we know, the budget, of course, is an estimate of what revenues will come in and what the government will do with those revenues. So if the revenues don't actually pan out as expected, then what the government expected to do can't be done. Not to mention, as Kenny mentioned a while ago there, the fact that there are all these unexpected, what you call black swan events that show up every so often that you then have to, you didn't cater for them, but you must take care of them. Like the hurricane in 2017, we know we live in a hurricane zone, but having suffered Erica in 2015, we thought it might have been about 30 years ago before we had a similar event. It happened 2 years later, which you then have to deal with that serious event. And these things, of course, are still there. Even the question of the recovery from the COVID, there's a great uncertainty as to how that's going to go forward. So even in terms of our planning, it's all tentative planning, and we have to be, shall we say, light-footed. In other words, we don't take decisions so hard on one side that it's difficult for us to switch if the conditions demand that we move in another direction, you know? So the very important thing for the economy there is the question of getting foreign exchange into Dominica, whether by exporting tourism services or by getting the CBI programs up and running as well as they were running before the COVID pandemic came around. Yeah.
Good. Interesting. You went along that route. Now, government was returned to office following the general elections in December of last year. And the voting population accepted the soundbite of the campaign, that is building a dynamic Dominica and ushering in a new season of development. And that came about because really the confidence and hope that had been instilled in both the government and instilled within the population as well, following the two horrendous, natural events that you just mentioned, Erica and Maria. The country was well on the way to recovery, and confidence was high, to the extent that the IMF, as recently as January this year, in assessing the forecast of the Dominican economy, IMF stated that the economy was set to expand by 5.5%, 4.5%, and 3.6% for the years 2020, 2021, and 2022, respectively. That was the level of excitement and hope and confidence that the IMF and our the international community had in the performance of the economy. Then, as we have said, COVID came along and things have turned around. Overall, do you think that the response of the government, what comment would you make about the response of the government to cope and manage with the sudden impact of this pandemic and the shutting down of the country?
Well, I think the event hit everybody like a bolt of lightning out of nowhere. So neither the government nor the population really were prepared or had plans in place to just implement. Right? So I think the government did very well in terms of, from the medical point of view, of quickly implementing some plans and implementing them and sticking to them, with the result that we had no deaths. It is one of the few countries in the world that had no deaths. And we only had 18 confirmed cases, nearly all of which were imported, although some who imported it then spread it to a couple of people in Dominica. But we managed to keep that down. And the populace itself, contrasted with the American populace, took the advice of the professionals in the medical field about staying home, what to do, wash your hands cleverly, wear masks when you go out, etc. Very much in stride. So the populace and the government did the right thing to tamper the health impact of the virus, you know. However, the economic impact, we were less able to deal with it, simply for the reason that we depend on selling goods and services, especially the tourism services, to people abroad. If they can't travel, and we've decided we're not allowing people to enter, that essentially means that the tourism business was knocked flat. And that is where we are now, and our job, the big job, is to get, as we say, dynamism back into the tourism business, so that we can see people coming back to Dominica, taxi drivers getting jobs, hotels reopening, rehiring the staff who are now laid off or made unemployed, as the case might be, and we start getting some foreign exchange back on island.
Can you have your thoughts on the same matter?
Well, I concur with Mark. I think that the level of unison between the message that came from the government, from the private sector, and also from how the population within the village centers, you know, because this wasn't just about how it worked in Roseau or in Portsmouth. I mean, in every hamlet, people behaved to protocol. And I know since then we've had kind of an opening up and a loosening, and you could almost say that people have become a bit too lax. But if you look at the nature of our island, and we are very outdoorsy, people like to be outdoors, and to have naturally contained that for so long, and to even conform to things and stereotypes that people don't think we can conform to. I mean, the whole Dominicans don't like to queue and so on. We did that successfully for months, going to the supermarkets and working within constrained environments. Yes, there were breaches, but still people generally conformed, which is why we have the result that we have today. It is a good example for the ability of the population and the policymakers to follow a plan. Whether we can take that and to apply that to something else is another thing, but it would be good if we could look to the example that was set by health and how they implemented this, to use that as an example for other policy adjustments that need a national agenda.
Yes, you know, and, to some extent too, let's remember that the pandemic really broke out some mere 2.5 months after a cabinet comprising relatively young, and one can even say politically inexperienced persons were sworn in. And for some of them, those of us looking on may have be inclined to think for them it may have been a baptism of fire. But I find that generally the leadership of the country, of the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health, I think the quality of leadership that was exhibited there, taking hold of the situation, explaining to the people what's going on, encouraging the people to adhere to the protocols, that helped a lot. In other words, it was a test of leadership in itself, I think. Right?
Yeah, you could say that.
And they handled the situation, I think, commendably. Now, past experience in this particular session tells us that we can spend a lot of time, haggling around the preliminary matters in the budget address. But when it comes to, and we try to rush through the substance of the address, because I think our average listener is more interested in, what are the measures, what are the things that the government intends to put in place or intends to continue on that can make my life better, that can make my children's life better, that can make the country better. And I want us to, to delve into, to some of these. Let's start off with infrastructure and road infrastructure, for example, right? And there are a number of interventions that have been made. The West Coast Road, a number of contracts have been signed for the East Coast roads and so on, right? I recall, reading a development economist once saying that the road to development is roads, And your thoughts on especially the road infrastructure initiatives?
You want to go ahead, Mark? Or I'll go ahead. Okay, so from a general point of view, there were two things that we concentrated on when we did the consultations with government, amongst other things. But one of them was capital projects. Because, again, we needed to see activity for private sector firms and also for the procurement chain downwards to be able to reflect itself in revenue for the local service providers, whether they be for lumber, whether they be for the commodities that would support increased activity in the construction sector from capital projects. So we are happy that this is happening. I don't want for us to lose also, and we'll come to that, I guess, at a later point, the fact that the government has announced, based on also our interventions and our discussions, and something that they've always kept on saying that we've tried to dialogue with them on, which is the Procurement Act, that they're going to repeal that and introduce a new Procurement Act in September, which falls in line with the new wave of capital projects that will be in line for this budget year. But it is important in a general sense because COVID represents also an opportunity for us to look inwards and to be able to produce from within what we normally, even in some cases, would have gone externally to get. So there's going to have to be a lot more reliance on local resources or on players who are already here, even if they may be contractors from overseas, but who are on island because they've been delivering here and are in place in Dominica. So that's going to be very important because from the procurement chain locally, our local service providers, our supermarkets, our hardware stores, our vendors for food, etc., are going to actually look forward to these projects bearing revenue for them.
Well, interestingly, they has talked about the COVID experience. One of the things that COVID brought to the forefront was the whole digital communications technology.
We're finishing on roads. You want to finish on roads?
No. Well, they connected. It's communication.
Okay.
So because to a large extent, communication technology can replace physical travel from one place to the other. But the reason I'm saying that is that the government has a ministry which has the digital economy as part of its name, and its intention, I would think, is to promote Dominicans, the citizens, to be producers of digital goods rather than simple buyers of digital goods. Because if you take, for example, the use of Zoom for meetings, we had lots of Zoom meetings locally, all of which we paid for abroad. So we should be looking at the digital economy not only as users of the equipment and the software that's produced, but we should look into the digital economy directly as sources of revenue where we can produce things, digital goods, for sale to others abroad. Yes, for example, and as well as locally. For example, we are trying to push tourism, but we have nobody on the island that I know of who is in the tourism business who is using locally developed software to manage his business. And that's not a very difficult thing to do. Kenny is a computer programmer. He knows that's not hard to do. So we should, as well as the government, I think, can take a proactive role in getting a software development business going, because the government has a number of things which they must digitize, do it in digital form. For example, we have this brand new hospital. I would assume that as part of the plan for the operation of the hospital is that the medical records will be in digital form and not on paper files. So if that's the case, the government is going to need somebody or bodies to develop software to run the hospital. A team of people in Dominica can do that, so the government should be taking every step to make sure that when these projects come up, that local entrepreneurs are given the opportunity to bid on those projects. And there are lots of little, what seem to be complicated projects, like that actually small database projects, like the digitization of the birth and death records. That's a simple database to be built. The people who study computer science at the college could develop that. And I would think in terms of, because we need to get back out of the COVID unemployment, etc., and find jobs for people. And I think the digital economy is a good place for us to steer our students and young people towards finding careers. And the government because the government still has lots of paper everywhere, and as it moves towards digitizing its affairs, that the local population should be able to participate as consultants, as computer programmers, to build these systems. That's what I say. And in terms of the physical infrastructure, well, Dominica is a difficult place to get around. We know that. And this infrastructure, the roads particularly, are quite difficult and expensive to build. But we've been doing a fairly good job of building out the roads, although we're running into a problem there where the number of persons per mile of road is decreasing, which makes the road and its maintenance very expensive on the smaller and smaller.
Let's focus on the deliverables.
It's just to put it in context, because when the roads are built, they have to be maintained, because we know nearly all the roads that are being spoken of as needing some upkeep or the other, once upon a time, or not so long ago, were brand new roads. You know?
Well, we're speaking of developing a dynamic and Dominica, where there's, lots of economic activity, people are in hope, the various sectors in the economy are growing, tax revenue is increasing. That is the image, that is the vision I see, rather than, hollowing in, we cannot afford the infrastructure, maintenance costs and so on. Kenny, let us take the West Coast Road, a very important road in the economic life of the country, right? What are your views on the works that have been done there? right?
Well, the works are good. I think
Libla Highway, for
yes,
example.
the EO Libla Highway. The works are good, but from a private sector point of view, the most important thing is the connection of the economy,
Right.
because we still have that north-south divide, which in a small country, seems kind of strange, but even along the west coast, there are opportunities for businesses to expand towards Portsmouth. Because if you look at the development of Roseau, it's really difficult to expand towards the south, towards Newtown Way. It's more natural to expand north. And we tend to think of even Canefield as far, but it really isn't. And so what the road does is it allows future thinkers, not just locals, but those who want to invest in Dominica, to look feasibly at expanding, along a natural line toward the north. Because funnily enough, we have our own prejudices locally in terms of how we see business growing. But someone who comes from somewhere else, who comes here, who's looking at developing, a new business or looking to invest in Dominica, is going to look more openly at the country, given that we have telecom services running north, the road is good now running north, and that they shouldn't have the prejudice to say, why can't I open something in Jimmet, or why can't I open something in Salisbury? Because they don't have that preconceived notion that these areas are not somewhere that you can invest in. So that's what the road does. The road basically gives people an opportunity to expand their thinking about what they can do. I do want to also touch, though, I haven't looked for the estimates, but the issue of the feeder roads for farmers. And that hasn't, I don't know whether that has been discussed anywhere, but that is crucial because agriculture has taken added importance. It was mentioned in the budget that it is now growing in significance to the local population. More and more people are taking up farming. You've got the World Bank project, etc. But it requires that the road networks be more viable, because whilst you can do many things digitally, you can't bring a crop from farm to market over the internet. You can sell it, so you can give greater appreciation to it, but you need physical delivery platforms.
Transport it in a drone.
Well, maybe. But the point remains that we do need to have that. And hopefully what will happen is, because now the main tributaries are actually built up, the main roadways, that there can be more concentration. I know there was the BAM project some time ago. And again, with the World Bank project now, I know a lot of people have subscribed to the World Bank project. And because of that and the increased focus on getting inputs into the farms, then the extension officers will be amongst the first to report the state of the feeder roads and whether they can be financed into better shape so that it fits in with the whole image of the country.
Yeah, and then the argument you make there for, economic opportunities being opened up north of Roseau. I think even the road from Wardjab through Kalinago territory to Hatton Garden will have that same impact. And actually construction on that road, is due to begin, this year, very soon.
Yeah. But even you spoke about the West Coast Road. If you look at, for example, the Hilton being built in Salisbury, when it is finished, the actual person who stays at the Hilton can make a choice, can say, do I go north to go to a restaurant, or do I go south? Rather than being shaped simply by the fact that, one route is better than the other. And that makes a huge difference, because then people, again, who come into the environment for the first time don't have the prejudices. And once the tour guides and operators, etc., keep an open mind about the locations and the locales they take them to, then it widens the whole ability of people across the country to benefit from tourism and also just the service provisions.
Right, excellent. Let's take a snapshot at agriculture and the achievements, because I was struck by the achievements in agriculture to date. That through the efforts of the Ministry of Agriculture, that And the investments made, there was actually an increase in production of 22.9%, with 4,409 acres being cultivated compared to 3,320 the previous year, with an estimated increase in revenue of 20% for 2,748 farmers. Now, this seems to me to be a significant impact, you know, on the agricultural community and on agriculture itself, you know. It's always good when you see those numbers, because you know, you hear people saying, you know, nothing happening in agriculture. I don't know if you got that comment, you know. And the figures really paint a totally different picture. 4,235 citrus plants distributed to establish 60 acres among 111 farmers, you know. And interestingly, in the east, right, 2 agro-processing facilities built at Dalis to support 42 Toloma and bay oil producers. 5 cassava processing facilities in Salibia, Atkinson, St. C, Castlebruce, and Calibishi are currently under construction. This will benefit 135 cassava farmers and 15 processors. Now, we have investments there to really stimulate both agricultural production and support agro-industry development, because I think the cassava industry can really grow and become a very big industry with the cassava products that can be produced. And what are your views on those particular achievements?
Well, we just did some division by things. I would see that the output per person is actually pretty low.
Yeah.
But so we in agriculture in Dominica, we are faced with a peculiar problem.
Do you have a theoretical information about the output should be for those
should be higher.
in that environment, well, and for that crop?
Yeah. Well, if you take, you can take it in many ways.
What is your barometer?
No. If you say
the output is
that
low,
a person ought to make X amount as income, then you figure it out. But what I was about to say is, in terms of Dominica's agricultural production, we should accept the fact that we are high-cost producers, partly because we produce things in small volumes. Therefore, we have to set up our agricultural products in such a way that they command the highest price in the market, that we don't sell commodities. We sell branded goods, and we charge the proper price for it. I remember a couple of years ago talking to a high official in the Ministry of Agriculture, who was bemoaning the fact that yams for Dominica in Martinique were selling for €3.99 a pound, and yams from Costa Rica were selling for $1.92 a pound. And they were saying that we're not competitive. But of course we are competitive. We are competitive with the group of persons who appreciate a high quality yam that can be sold at basically €4 a kilo.
It's interesting.
So, and in the supermarket, it's written clearly. There are 2, barrels of stuff there. Yams from Dominica, yams from Costa Rica. When the person comes to the supermarket, he says, Dominica yams, right? He buys Dominica yams because there is a brand and name attached to it. It's Dominica yams. So we shouldn't be thinking like we did with the banana business there about just selling bananas. It's when the banana business was practically dead, we tried to put a brand on it, but too late.
Interestingly, in a recent consultation, we were told that there's a new channel of transportation between Dominica and Martinique for yams. That is Ned Wade, goes weekly. And the Martinique market wants around 15,000 pounds of yams a week. We're supplying around 5,000 pounds a week. I would think the improvements in agriculture are interesting, but there is a view change that needs to happen, that agriculture has to be done by a farmer. Agriculture really is an entrepreneurial exercise as much as it is a physical farming exercise. And the two, it's a marriage of the two. You know, in the same way that you will have, for example, La Falaise as a laboratory facility. You will have the lab technician, but it is owned by an entrepreneur. And I think there's an avenue for that, because we have to, you know, some of the local supermarkets, some of our members want to buy more local produce, but we have to build capacity. And part of that capacity has to be in understanding the supply chain needs of even our own local consumers, much less the foreign markets. And it's all it's a huge riddle that has to be solved. And we never really had to solve it in the past. You know, in the past, if you look at the history of Dominica, we had one central buyer and everyone conforming to the product. We had one central buyer for bananas, Geest. We had one central buyer for limes, Elrose. We had one central buyers for coconuts, DCP. And now we have a lot of different people producing a range of different products and trying to get markets for them. And I think now agriculture as a business is much more difficult than it used to be, simply because you're competing with the WTO-led imports. Many of our businesses are our food, our importers of food, etc., importing sometimes much cheaper than it is for us to actually produce the product here. And we have to have import substitution. The government has done that, I believe, with white potatoes.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
You know, but even then, it's still seasonal.
Yeah.
And so it needs a greater discussion, because young people in particular who want to do agriculture need to understand and need to be swayed by the fact that agriculture is not simply about just knowing what moon to plant the produce or the plant, or to know how to do irrigation, etc. It is, overall, it is a business. And once they understand that, then I think people can understand a bit more about what it is that they need to do to be able to thrive, given that farming is, in general, in Dominica, is income tax free. The inputs are available. You know, yes, it is very sensitive to climatic events, and yes, it does rely on things like feeder roads and market availability. But there are opportunities. It's just that obviously people need to be better educated about the business of agriculture.
Maybe let me just disagree with you a little bit. Something you said there. Not so much disagree, but I have to put you straight. Geest never bought bananas from Dominica.
Well, yes, I understand that. Yes,
yeah,
we agree. They took it
for us, and he sold it for us.
Yes,
and then he gave us what was left.
3 cents on the dollar.
His money out.
That's right.
Secondly, there's something that's ongoing and being spoken about. I participated in 1 or 2 sessions. I think I started that way back when I was in the National Export Council. The question of building up a national brand, it's back on the agenda being spoken about. So just as I said in Martinique there, the owner of the store wrote over the board, Dominica yams. But what we want to have is, when you go anywhere, you see something physical, a sign, an image that says Dominica, whether it's yams, whether it's tourism, whether it's bananas again.
But it's water.
So we have to work on that, because for us to move away from the business of producing commodities and go towards branded goods, because let's take a simple thing, coffee. The people who grow coffee and sell coffee to Starbucks make practically no money. Starbucks makes all the money because the thing says Starbucks. It doesn't, and nobody wonders where the coffee comes from. And he isn't told either. But if you ask the Starbucks people where this coffee comes from, he won't tell you. You buy Starbucks, and the price, and who becomes a millionaire? The owner of the Starbucks store, because most of the value is in the intellectual property, the brand. So if we have to get into that method of selling our own products from Dominica, whether they be in agriculture or anything else.
Okay, some of the issues that you both Kenya and yourself have mentioned, They're being addressed under the Emergency Agricultural Livelihoods and Climate Resilience Project, a $67 million project, right? Which include upgrade of production capacities and skills, and strengthening producers' linkage with markets. As a matter of fact, in one of the Prime Minister's recent Abattoir programs, I heard him indicate that he's thinking of reconfiguring the Ministry of Trade to establish a trade facilitation unit in there, so that the linkage, that the research can be done and the support provided to exporters generally, which would include agricultural exporters, right? It is expected under that project really to propagate approximately 627,600 tree crops, as well as 837,000 vegetable seedlings. Now, all other things being equal, if weather conditions, etc., are favorable, 4, 5, 6 months down the road, 1 year, 2 years down the road, that will have a serious impact on production, right, on output. But again, the whole question of pricing. Our farmers generally will win on fresh market prices, and we have to develop a serious agro-industry, really. As you said, Mark, in the earlier days, when Elrose produced limes and produced lime oil and live concentrate and even grapefruit concentrate, they were producing for themselves on lands owned by them.
Yes.
Correct.
And they set the price.
And paying wages that were not very good either.
And wages not good in those days. Yeah. Now, with the leveling of the playing field, given the philosophy of succeeding governments, and particularly this government, land is now in smaller holdings by smaller landowners, and perhaps the economies of product scale are not as large. But I think if farmers really come together and form the various farmer groups, right, under which they can source inputs, more cheaply, packaging material more cheaply, getting professional advice, more cheaply. Don't you think that can have a dent on the overall cost of production?
I think I have a slight disagreement with you.
Not a suggestion.
Yeah. Well, true. There are two things from the chamber point of view. One of the things that we've been trying to say to government is, and it's interesting that you said trade, because we dialogue a lot with trade, is that government needs to start to understand the relationship between, and the relationship with the public and private sector should be such that trade delegations from Dominica should be the government and private sector groups going together. You go to Colombia, not many people know, for example, we have trade agreements with Colombia, where we have goods that have duty-free entrance into the Colombian market. But those agreements mean nothing if the private sector doesn't know what products that it can actually export to Colombia. Same that we have an EPA with the EU. Everyone wants to trade with the Caribbean because they know we are net importers and not exporters. But we have the ability, if the private and public sector unite, to be able to find some opportunities that some of the more adventurous players can seize on. But coming back to the agriculture, I think we have to start to make a difference between, or make a differentiation between the farmers as producers and the farmers as market entrants.
Agreed.
And one of the disservices that has been done to agriculture is that we have gone, and Mark pointed out the whole differentiation with yeast. Well, the farmers back then, just like in the Elrose time, did not necessarily care about the fact of how much yeast or Elrose made. They just were concerned with the fact that they were getting a steady income for their product. In other words, the ubiquitous market. But now, this is not so. There is no magical one person going to take on that load for us. So I believe it is critical for entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, and believe it or not, the crazy thing is right now, we have a growth business being represented still in many cases by hucksters.
Yeah.
You know, which is, when you think about it, it's crazy. And I'll give an example of something that, you know, I've discovered recently. Martinique and Guadeloupe both import over £1 million of cut flowers from Colombia, Ecuador, Cote d'Ivoire, France, and Holland. They have no statistics of flowers being imported from Dominica. Zero. Now, there's no doubt that hucksters may be taking across some cut flowers on boats, but it's not measurable as a statistic. And that is because we have no entrepreneurial representation of the industry. And it's difficult for the farmers who've never done that in the past, who've never gone on a trade mission, to be able to do that. And I think the Ministry of Trade are doing a decent job. Mathan Walter and the team there are doing a decent job, but some of that finance has to be turned into facilitating entrepreneurs. And it may be that some of the people are some of the business people in Dominica who will be tasked to represent Dominica as part of trade delegations who can look at some of these opportunities to export products, farming products, amongst other things, into those markets.
Well, let's hope that from listening to the Prime Minister and the Trade Facilitation Unit in the Ministry of Trade, I think these issues are on the agenda for being addressed. Now, since we're speaking about young entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, there is an opportunity that currently exists that came out starkly in the budget. It relates to the Abattoir, an important, you know, facility for making us self-sufficient in supplying our protein and making us self-sufficient in poultry and pork, right? It has been there for some time. It has been under being operated under the Ministry of Agriculture. And the intention is to lease it out. Okay. Prime Minister indicated to lease, is willing
for
to lease
$1,
it
I think,
$1,
right?
Yeah,
per year, not per month.
What do you think? You know, no, this is not the first time that that the government is offering to lease out this facility. About 3 years ago, there was actually a call for proposals to lease, and I don't think we got anything from our local entrepreneurs. You know, what do you think is the core reason why some people? And we have lots of young professionals. We have lots of young professionals who do agriculture, but what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts would be that everybody wants to make money. And if nobody is thinking that they can make money running the abattoir, that's concerning. Because it would seem that the people who could do that might have done some little back of the envelope calculations and concluded that they wouldn't make a profit. I don't know. Because what I think the government ought to do, if they're interested in leasing it out, is to effectively do a whole business plan and have it at the ministry or on the government's website, etc., and says, here's the abattoir for lease for $1 a year, here's the cost of operating, here's the amount of meat you need to put through it to break even, so that potential people who would like to go into it can have some good idea, because it has been run for a while, so there is some data and information as to what actually happened, rather than simple speculation about what might happen. So use that information, the experience there, to do a plan and to explain to potential leasers, here is what is available and here's the amount of money you can make.
But in the first, Mark, I don't want to cut across you, but in the first call for proposals that went out about 3 or 4 years ago, all that information was available to prospective investors.
I have a different
to build this business plan.
I have a different take on this.
Let's hear Kenny on that.
I have a different take on this. I think, first of all, we're too concentrated on trying to get a mysterious person who never exists to emerge. We have no experience of running an abattoir in the past in Dominica. We have no real agricultural business people, business entrepreneurs. So the first thing that has to come from this is, does that person actually have to be Dominican? Because the business is running in Dominica. So is it that we need someone locally taking up the mantle, or do we need someone to take it up from a private sector point of view? That's the first thing. What Mark mentioned is interesting, but what is really important is what competitive advantage is the government going to give the abattoir through legislation or other protective mechanisms that's going to get it a kick up if you're going to give it to the private sector? Because everybody wants to be able to have some advantage, because if it was being built from the ground up by a private sector person, it would have a USP. What is the unique selling point? We don't have one specifically because you're adopting it, you're not creating it. So I would say, first of all, if you're going to look at giving the abattoir to someone in the private sector to run, you have to look at legislation. What kind of legislation you can do to protect, for example, the production of the products from the abattoir? What kind of competitive advantage? Are you going to say that everyone, for example, all of the government facilities like the hospital, etc., will have to procure from the abattoir as part of a competitive advantage? So you have to put something in place to be able to give it a carrot for the private sector people. Because right now it is easier, you will surely know this from the business, if you know the business of chicken and importing chicken. It is easier to import a container of frozen chicken and resell it locally than it is to be able to go through the process of running an abattoir. So what are you going to do to put legislation in place to make it easier for that business to be able to get off the ground quicker? Once that is done, then you can probably get some traction on this. And I think it's a good offer, but it needs to have some wings.
But so, I think you're treading in what I've called dangerous grounds there.
Yes, I am.
I think you're kind of hinting at some kind of blockage of imported products that will compete with the abattoir's products. But importantly, we must remember that the point of having the chickens and the pigs and so on is to make sure the population is well nourished. And you must remember as well that there are lots of people in Dominica who have low incomes. So it's the price at the point of sale for the consumer must be about the same as what he gets now from the person importing it. Otherwise, you're going to place him in the situation where if he can't get the one from abroad that's within his range of his pocket, and he's only allowed to buy what comes from the abattoirs produced locally, then he has to buy less of it, which compromises his nutritional status.
The chicken and egg paradigm comes to play. But if you look at what happens in Jamaica, for example, have enacted controls and local production standards that enable their poultry association to have a minimum level of subscription from local businesses. Now, that's within the whole WTO infrastructure. And, you know, me, in my role as the Chamber of Commerce, I represent businesses who are importing and reselling chicken. Yes. So we're not going to, I'm not trying to harm the interests of my members, but what I'm saying to you is that Mr. Lambert's question was, what would make the abattoir attractive? And you have to have some level of competitive advantage. And right now, the abattoir does not have a competitive advantage. And I'm not saying specifically that you need to restrict the market, but if you look at what happened with white potatoes, we discussed it earlier, there was a restriction put on the imports. So the local market is based on demand and supply. We are not able to locally produce chickens at the level that people want to be able to consume. In terms of the price, you could argue that price is a factor too, but local people love to buy local meat.
Yeah, definitely.
We are not producing enough of it in a schedule that allows supermarkets to resell to be able to nourish the same population.
Kenny, there's an interesting proposal in the budget address today that has the potential to address, you know, the point you made where, you know, when you say, does it have to be a local person? And I want to refer to the Dominican entrepreneurship visa program that was mentioned, right? under that program, foreign investors who start a business in an approved sector or who invest in an existing approved local business or pursue the option of a joint venture with a local business owner will be granted resident status. Right? Do you think this has a potential to fly?
Yes, I mean, I'm an advocate of it. I've been a long advocate of it. I think we have an issue that has been happening alongside all of the other issues that are happening. Is that, you know, those of you who are older than me, I can say that, can talk about the long-term migration, net migration from Dominica, from time immemorial. I've gone back and read some of the journals on Dominica from the 1950s, and it has not abated. It has been a consistent stream outwards. And I remember you speaking about tourism earlier. I remember meeting the Grenadian economist Michael Julian, and he made the point in Jamaica, I believe. Yes, that was when Portia Simpson Miller was the Prime Minister. He made the point that it would take roughly between 100 and 200 families in any economy in the Eastern Caribbean to replace the entire tourism industry, 100 to 200 resident new families per year in an economy to derive the revenue of the entire tourism industry, which is, of course, transient.
Yeah.
And we have to do something about this. At the same time, we do not have in our countries, and that's another thing from a private sector point of view, we have no culture in the Eastern Caribbean, some of it in Jamaica, of venture capital. We are totally dependent on loan financing, some grant aid, typically in agriculture, but in terms of new ventures, for example, there's no culture of VC or angel investment. And so businesses who need to get a startup with the view of later either capitalizing on a good idea by patenting or even taking it to larger markets and possibly, you know, doing an IPO, there's just literally no chance of that happening. Okay. And so increased investment from external is welcome.
Excellent. Now, in the meantime, I see we probably just have about 20 minutes or so more, and there's some critical matters that I think we should touch on. So let us zero in on the small and micro business enterprise. I think that has been in the talk, talk shows, and the Prime Minister had it on one of his Anupali programs, right? And we know that, in a country like Dominica, small and medium enterprise is really the backbone of the business sector here, right? And Dominica is the government, under this budget, is really reaching out to provide support for that sector, right? A number of measures, were announced in the budget today, right? Which are some of which amount to $23.2 million. First, to cushion the negative impact of COVID. And these measures included extension of tax payment and filing due dates, access to a special highly concessional loan facility to assist businesses in meeting their operational costs, and livelihood grants to the self-employed and employees who were grossly affected. To date, 799 individuals have received livelihood grants. Another 292 grants have just been approved for payment this week, while 390 loans have been approved. Now, what do you hear on the ground about that type of assistance to small business? I say that against the backdrop of the delivery, effectiveness of the delivery mechanism, especially with the grants.
Well, I think with the grants, it's more to support consumption, because if, for example, in the last couple of months, when the city was closed at 1 o'clock, and everybody had to go home. So if you're a small business person, let's say a lot of small business people are in the food service business, Your customers simply disappeared because they all went home for lunch. They didn't come to town, so you lost your livelihood essentially. So the grant that the government would have given supposedly to support your business, you have to use some of it to buy your stuff to keep yourself, alive. So it's good, but I think it's more in terms of livelihood support rather than the business support itself. Because until the climate for the business becomes vibrant again, you're basically just trying to stay alive.
An important part of this is, I don't know at what point in the budget it was said, I can't remember, but there was a statement by the Prime Minister about the classification of small businesses. And that is important because many of these enterprises are micro enterprises. First of all, we from the DIC point of view, we advocated for increased financial resources being made available. And so that is good news. I don't have the data. I was looking to try and have the data for the subsistence from the incentives, the fiscal incentives packages, because we forget that over 2,000 people in tourism were effectively able to access income support via DSS. I believe the government put $15 million there. And that was an interim period to tide them over, leading into now. The $30 million that's going to be available over the next 3 years, yes, is vital. It's vital because the government needs to propel business out of the micro enterprise using commingling funds for what would be business into staying alive. Versus businesses that actually have a plan to project upwards to become revenue contributors to the economy. And that's going to be a crucial part of what is going to actually widen the private sector base. Because as I mentioned earlier, and I've mentioned so many times over the last couple of years, and the same thing, to be honest, happens in more developed countries, which is that every time you have a crisis, those at the top get stronger. But what we tend to also find is we tend to capitalize the profits and socialize the risk. And at the highest level, that's not good for an economy because the ones at the top level often are the ones who pay the least tax because they have the greater wherewithal. And because they employ more people, so government are more pliant towards giving incentives to larger businesses. But it's those businesses that are growing that become the biggest contributors to the economy. And the government has listened to the fact that we said to them, you need to get more businesses that are in the $500,000 to $1 million range, growing upwards, adding employees as they grow. Because it is those companies that will fuel aggression for more financial products. Because as we've heard many times, there's liquidity. But the access to that liquidity is something that's an issue. And what we've advocated is for them to become more creative through the financial institutions, in particular the aid bank, about accepting things like debentures, life insurance, etc., rather than the typical, let's secure your land, because we're running out of land to secure. People are they're oversubscribed, they're over leveraged. And that is a concern because the economy in what has happened in other countries is that they've literally written off debt to allow people to start to retool and reconsume. Okay. In a smaller country, that's difficult to do. But we have mechanisms that will allow the government to say to some people, so for example, the tourism business, now COVID is on. The effect of COVID is on. Many of these tourism businesses, many of these hotels, especially the ones that have been damaged from Maria, and in some cases Erica, have the opportunity to retool and rebuild. But if you don't give them access to finance, and they can't do that, when the market opens up again, it's going to be the same 5 or 6 better off hotels who are going to cannibalize all of the traffic. And so it's the entire capital investment that the government is making in terms of putting money into the aid bank and into other programs is dependent on the gatekeepers to become very creative and also very aggressive about how they're going to get finance out.
And there are also concessions to the manufacturing sector. I know the manufacturers for some time, have been making some noises, and then the budget speaks to providing removal of VAT and import duty on packaging and labeling materials, as well as on the equipment and machinery used in the production of goods, with respect from September 1st of this year.
Yeah.
So that should help
There's
the
an interesting thing.
manufacturing sector. Philip, I hope.
You know, it is the largest group of manufacturers in Dominica. People bake.
Bakers.
Yeah, and people don't think of bakers and bread making as being manufacturing.
They transform
But that's what they do,
that's
and that's one of the biggest employers of labor and in Dominica. So I don't know if the bakers are watching me there, but you should go to the aid bank when the thing is ready to say, on the manufacturing side, you're a manufacturer and you want to take advantage of the loan facilities that's available at a better rate. So you get better equipment, you make, improve your productivity, and you can sell bread cheaper to the public and make more money.
The incentives are good, and they have to be tied into everything else.
There are incentives to tour operators.
No, I mean from manufacturers. Okay. I think what I'm saying is, okay, so you have the incentive now, which is brilliant, for you to be able to get VAT-free on packaging and labeling, etc. But that same guy is still negotiating the $1.5 million loan, where he has a $500,000 NPL with the same institution, and the institution is saying, after that 1.5 million, we want you to take, we want to take 500,000 right off.
Yes.
Now, interestingly, and I mentioned it this morning on a show, I met last week with the IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank. Now, currently, the ECCB have a mechanism for buying private sector debt from the commercial banks, but the ECCB does not regulate the aid bank or the credit unions. So I spoke to them last week, and they said that they would be interested, but to do that, the interesting thing is that even though they can buy the debt, they will still take the collateral across. so they will give you a haircut on the interest. But that discussion where the manufacturer sits down in a room with the bank and works out a solution that exists, that allows them to realize that they have a commitment that needs to be kept on the old debt, and is able to then move forward with the new facility, because the new facility terms, and it's free money. It's 1% moratorium of 12 months, etc. But it's also a frustration for these businesses because they're so close, but they have NPLs. Now, don't get me wrong, and I also said that this morning, not every business should survive. I think we have an old accountant now past once told me that no one ever files for bankruptcy in Dominica. People will operate bankrupt, they will claim that they need to get the money and that they need to provide it to them, but no one really looks at the feasibility of how a business was run before it collapsed. There may be an opportunity for new businesses.
What about the whole issue of capitalization, especially among family businesses? I have known some family businesses that have the potential to grow, but there is a culture. This is my business. My grandfather started this business, and you can see with an injection of, they're undercapitalized, really, right? But they resist.
Well, the thing is, that is
Mark take that for now.
That is part of our culture, and that is part of the culture that's not good for economic development. Which I don't know how you get rid of that, but what you're saying there is very true. That's how we are, you know.
In the stock market.
So
You don't get rid of it. You change the climate that exists by you introducing new players. Our private sector has been homogeneous for a long time. If you were in Dominica 50 years ago or 40 years ago and you came back, many of the same players are there doing the same thing.
Doing the same thing.
yeah, I was there 40 years ago.
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, but the point that remains is that for the banking as it is right now traditionally exists in a way, in a model that is pretty much dying, which is where you simply give someone money on the basis that you've read their business plan, you have developed trust in them, and you lend them money to be able to go out and perform that business service. The fact is, many of the bankers have to understand the business. They have to understand the business model, and in a lot of cases, they don't. And the other thing, I know we have limited time, Mark spoke about it the last time we were here, which is intellectual property. Many of these businesses, for example, 8Bank will have the business equipment still from a business that is basically non-performing, and there are other people in Dominica who can run the business. So really what's important is the IP and being able to give some royalties to the existing owner of the idea. Instead, the equipment sits there, it stays there, and it falls by the wayside. And I think institutions like 8Bank need more support from government in being able to tool them up and strengthen them so that they understand how they can transfer intellectual property between businesses. But to your question about the family businesses, that can't change because unless you have new players coming into an industry or a sector or into the country in general, then it's the people who are here and who have access to capital are the people who are here.
Oh, that's right. Okay, we have about 7 minutes left. I see, you know, we're preparing for the opening up of the country, and in the budget address, there are a number of, you know, measures that seem to be attractive. One of them is the concessions to registered tour operators, a package of concessions to them.
Well, the packages and the encouragement is for the tourism sector is, you know, welcome, you know, more than welcome. Our difficulty in the sector is a tremendous uncertainty. It's like most of Kenny's members own a store or some such thing, and he simply opens his store and these customers are in front of his door. Whereas the customers for the tourism enterprises are over there. They have to get here. So and a lots of things that were simply in place already have fallen away. And some of those have to be rebuilt. Airlines have gone bankrupt. They've decided to change their routes, prices, etc., etc. Well, I haven't understood. Somebody was saying, I read somewhere that Airbnb might be out of business. Anyway, but the entire uncertainty as to how tourism goes forward and as to when it will really be more or less back to normal, we just don't know. So the people in the tourism business are finding it hard to plan, you know, because it's not like, well, we say on the 7th of August, we should be reopening for international travel.
Right, that's right, yes.
Well, that doesn't mean anybody is going to show up on the 7th.
Because when 2 countries in the OECS opened up and very fairly early, and nobody was coming in. Right.
So it's when the business will come around, and the bigger problem is that we have so little leverage over getting the flow in. all we can do is say, yes, we are ready, we open, our hotels are there, and we advertise more and say to come to Dominica, free up from the stress, etc., etc. But that's as far as we can go.
Do you think the COVID-induced protocols might be temporarily a disincentive?
Well, yes, because for example, if you come in, well, most people come to Dominica as recreational tourists, come for about a week or thereabouts. If you're going to come to Dominica for about a week, and it looks to you like you're going to have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine, what's the point of coming?
How do we solve that?
Or even if you're not in quarantine, like a place like Dominica, it's not a place like St. Lucia or Barbados where the tourists come to be on the beach, so they could just self-isolate, if you like, at the hotel, go in the sea, come back, and turn and take the taxi and go home. The tourists who come to Dominica come to go out and to enjoy the sights and so on that we have here. So how we get them back here safely? I mean, when I say safely, safe for us.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
it's a thing that we have to think a lot about. And because we can put the protocols in place, because even I understand that the Dominican persons who have been allowed to come back in, last night I saw the doctors in charge of that, they lamented the fact that the people who were coming in, because they're Dominican citizens, are refusing to...
Very abusive, yes, to the health professionals.
Yeah, to follow the protocol. And so on. So
tourism has an unfortunate dilemma, and the unfortunate dilemma is that for tourism to be successful, it requires adherence to the health protocols. And the tourist's nature, unfortunately, is not to be inhibited when they're on holiday. Mm-hmm. So we have chosen, and you ask, how was the solution? There is no solution. I hate to say it like that. We have to make a choice between our freedom within our borders. In other words, if you say to the average person, would you prefer to have a situation where you took more risk and had the risk of being totally locked down again, or that we took more risk and you brought more people in? I think more people would say this situation as it is right now, whilst it is not the optimum, we would prefer it. The only glimmer of hope I see in the interim right now, and I say this because there's two factors for tourism businesses. The government has put some of the finance in place, and as I mentioned earlier, it may be a good time for tourism businesses to retool their operations, if not for rebuilding and just reconstructing, doing the work that the seasonal demands don't give them a chance to do. And the other opportunity would have been if the Caribbean, if CARICOM created a viable bubble between specific countries. So we know, for example, Caribbean Airlines are looking to do a flight which would have been either the Trinidad, San Juan, Antigua, then Dominica, then Barbados. If there was a bubble created, you could say that there is an opportunity to advertise or to market Dominica to Trinidad, which is an untapped market for us. They don't know the Dominican product, and there's a synergy between the higher earnings of the Trinidad market and just the difference between urban Trinidad life and natural Dominica. But that requires for there to be a safe bubble. And we might even have to skip the San Juan route if that's possible, because if we could do, I think originally the route was supposed to be Trinidad, Barbados, Barbados, Dominica. And if we could create a bubble around that, then we could, with protocols being adhered to between those three countries, be in a position to be able to build that channel for some business between Trinidad and Dominica.
But 8 o'clock is on us.
But in the interim, we have made a choice.
Very quickly, your thoughts quickly on the two things, property tax and the international airport.
The property tax, I think, is actually a good idea. One of the reasons it's a good idea is that it will help to force down the price of land, which will make it more...
The property tax?
Yeah.
It's for
Yeah,
buildings, you know.
yeah.
The whole properties that are ISO and health.
In other words, if you have a land there that's generating $0
yeah.
and you have to pay $2,000 every year on it, you might as well sell it to Kenny, who now have the trouble to pay the $2,000. But Kenny wouldn't buy it if he doesn't have a plan that this thing is going to make the $2,000 to pay its own tax.
That's right. Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's delayed by a year, right? The property tax?
It is expected this will take effect from July 1st, 2021.
Okay, so I'm assuming
So
that...
it gives the property owners a time to get their
Yes, and I'm also assuming that it will also help with government doing capital projects to build up the surroundings. It will put more pressure on those eyesores to conform. So,
especially with the Rosa Enhancement Program, you know, ongoing Rosa.
So yes, it's needed.
You have to do it stated. It's
started,
island-wide.
So yes, it's needed. That's what was the other one?
International airport or recurring.
I would say the confidence, now there's a level of confidence, I believe, in the international airport for one reason, one specific reason. It is the first time I've heard the ambassador, the Chinese ambassador, explicitly mention and refer to it directly as an incentive, as an imperative for the Chinese-Dominica relationship. And when the ambassador mentions it explicitly, it's pretty much a done deal.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, we noted when at the opening that this was a budget, all-inclusive budget, everybody benefiting, and it's really not possible for us to go through all the areas of importance. You know, we touched on quite a few of them, but there's still quite a few that I would have liked us to touch on. So 1 minute each for your closing remarks.
Well, I guess we could go first this time.
Yeah, go first.
Yeah, well, I would say in what I said at the beginning, essentially, is that the budget is a budget of hope within a period where we are facing great uncertainty as to how we go forward, because we might well find ourselves going backward depending on how the whole COVID thing evolves. So in a sense, it's a budget that's, you know, attempting to hold us there with the expectation that in the not too distant future, economic circumstances in the world will have changed sufficiently for us to be able to go forward confidently as we anticipated.
Kenny?
The budget is going to be a test of our human resource capability, because what it is a good intent to deliver a number of projects for a wide sector of Dominicans, but it will need both the public sector and the private sector to work in unison to achieve a lot of those goals. I will not put the blight of not wanting or not needing another climatic event or another shock, but I would say that is going to be the biggest test. It's because every time we have these budget discussions, it comes down to implementation, and that's where the human resource comes in.
Okay, well, Mark and Marit is left to me. Mark and Kenny is left to me to thank you for your spirited contributions to this discussion tonight. I want to thank you for having been here. And to all the viewers and listeners, I hope you found our program interesting. And it's a pity we did not have time to go into some of the other substantive areas that you may be curious about. But I'm sure that the management of GIS and in other fora will bring this to your attention and break it down in a manner that you can consume and find interesting. So good night to everybody, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.
Okay.